Sources of law. Where do our laws come from? Laws keep our society running as smoothly as possible. When you think of the law, you probably think of rules that say what people can and can't do. We all know that you can't steal from others without getting into trouble. That's one example of a law, but most laws set rules for how things work. There are laws about how people buy and sell property, how we elect government officials, and how activities in daily life should work. Where do all these laws come from? There are three main sources of law in the United States: constitutions, statutes, and regulations. Constitutions. The United States Constitution is often called the supreme law of the land. That means no law in the country can violate the rules, laws, and rights set forth in the Constitution. Some parts of the Constitution give specific laws that apply everywhere in the United States. For example, if someone commits a crime in one state and then flees to another state, the Constitution allows the criminal to be extradited or sent back to the state where the crime was committed. Other parts of the Constitution can either authorize or allow types of laws that may be passed or forbid or ban certain types of laws. For example, the Constitution allows Congress to pass laws about how business is conducted across state lines. The Constitution forbids Congress from passing laws that limit people's freedom of religion. The bottom line is that no law can be made in the U.S. unless the Constitution allows it to be made. Each state also has its own constitution that works in the same way as the U.S. Constitution, but only applies to that state. Many laws in your state come from your state's constitution and do not apply outside your state. Even so, laws in state constitutions must not violate the U.S. Constitution. Statutes. The Constitution gives Congress permission to pass laws about a limited number of topics. When Congress passes a law, that law is called a statute. Statutes passed by Congress apply to the entire United States. All of the thousands of statutes passed by Congress are collected together and organized by subject. The collection is called the United States Code. For example, the Constitution says Congress has the power to establish post offices and pass any laws necessary and proper for carrying out that power. This means that Congress can establish post offices and pass all the laws needed for running a postal service. In the part of the U.S. Code that deals with post offices, you would find a statute that establishes the United States Postal Service. You would also find many other statutes having to do with running the U.S. Postal Service. There are also statutes about what can and can't be sent through the mail, how the Postal Service must manage its money, working for the Postal Service, and many more. State constitutions also authorize state legislatures to pass laws. The state laws are also called statutes, and they only apply inside the state. Often, state statutes allow local governments to pass their own laws. Local laws are usually called ordinances, and they only apply within local boundaries, such as within a city or county. Regulations. Congress has the power to pass laws, but not to carry them out. The executive branch has the power to execute or carry out laws, but not to pass them. This means the two branches must work together. The executive branch is full of agencies that carry out laws. There are departments of agriculture, transportation, treasury, veterans affairs, and many more, including the Postal Service. Congress did not have the time to pass laws about every little detail of how all these agencies should run. Instead, Congress gives each agency the power to create its own rules. The rules that an agency within the executive branch makes are called regulations. A regulation has the power similar to a law. Some regulations say what people can and can't do. For example, there are Postal Service regulations that prohibit spitting, blocking the door, or asking for money at a post office. Other regulations describe how things work. For example, the post office has a regulation allowing customers to pay for postage over the internet. States also have agencies, and state agencies also issue regulations. Judicial precedent and interpretation. Statutes and regulations aren't always clear. Very often, people will argue about the meaning of a law and how a particular law should work. When people argue about how a statute or regulation should work, it often leads to a lawsuit. In the lawsuit, one side complains that it has suffered because the other side has not followed the law properly. The lawsuit will go through the court system. The court's job is to interpret the law and decide how it should be applied to a specific case. The lawsuit will begin in trial court and might be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. Once the Supreme Court has decided how the law should be interpreted, that interpretation must be followed in the future. This is called a precedent. A precedent is a decision that people can point to and say, here is how you handled this situation before. In this way, the court's interpretation acts as a law. Only the court can change a precedent. It does this by interpreting the law differently, which creates a new precedent. At the state level, a state's Court of Appeals and Supreme Court set precedents for how the state's laws should be interpreted. Types of law. Laws can be divided into two main categories, criminal and civil. The sources of law you just read about create both kinds of laws. However, courts treat criminal and civil cases differently. Criminal law. 3 categories of crimes: crimes against people, crimes against property, and crimes against the government. Criminal laws are laws that make certain actions a crime. These laws come from all 3 levels of government: federal, state, and local, and can be found in statutes, regulations, and sometimes state constitutions. There are 2 general levels of crimes. Felonies are serious crimes that normally have a punishment of more than a year in jail. Misdemeanors are less serious crimes where the penalty is usually less than a year in jail or even just a fine. A law that makes it a crime to do something usually says whether violating the law will be considered a felony or a misdemeanor. Felonies and misdemeanors are also divided into classes depending on how serious they are. In a criminal trial, the question is always, did this person commit a crime? The government is always on the one side of the case, charging someone with a crime. The person accused of the crime, called the defendant, is always on the other side. The defendant is either found innocent of the crime and acquitted, or he or she is found guilty and is sentenced with a fine or jail time. Civil law. Taking sides. Defendant, someone who is charged with a crime or accused of other wrongdoing. Plaintiff, someone who files a lawsuit against someone else in a civil court. Here's the basic rule of thumb. If it's not criminal, it's civil. Civil laws involve a wide range of subjects such as property, divorce, contracts, wills, personal injury, bankruptcy, employment, agriculture, and taxes. For this reason, there are many more civil laws than criminal laws. Civil laws usually help settle disagreements between people. People may disagree over things like rights to property, custody of children in divorce, or what a contract says. 2 sides in a civil case get to tell their story. The judge or jury decides what the facts are and what the remedy or solution should be. Sometimes, like criminal cases, civil cases involve someone who has injured someone else. Many injuries, such as accidents, are not caused by a crime. The person who caused the accident and the person who was hurt must come to an agreement about how the injured person can be compensated for his or her loss. Very often, civil law does not involve a problem or disagreement at all. If someone wants to make a will or drop a contract to sell something, there are civil laws that say how those things should be done. Special systems of law. There are 2 systems of law that work a little different from our regular system of law. They're different because they deal with 2 unique populations, the military and people under the age of 18. The special circumstances of these 2 groups make it necessary to have systems of law that are designed to handle their unique issues. Military law. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to make the rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. Congress did this by enacting the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or UCMJ, which is a set of criminal laws that apply to people in the military. The UCMJ also lists the procedures for conducting a military trial and explains what punishments are allowed. The military justice system is entirely separate from the civilian system. It is designed for the special needs of the military, so the UCMJ contains some laws that would not be needed for regular citizens. For example, it includes laws against leaving the military without permission, showing disrespect to a superior officer, and failing to obey an order. All members of the military are subject to the military justice system. Juvenile law. Criminal laws apply to everyone, but when a person under the age of 18 commits a crime, most states have a system of juvenile justice that deals with the case. The juvenile justice system is usually more flexible than the adult justice system. It allows a judge to look at many factors in a child's life when deciding what the consequences for committing a crime should be. The juvenile system is different because, as a society, we believe that young people sometimes make bad choices that they would not make if they were more mature. The juvenile system offers more chances for young people to learn from their mistakes without being negatively affected for the rest of their lives. Outside the juvenile justice system, there are other kinds of laws that affect people under 18. Some of these laws are laws targeted at young people, like curfew laws or laws about school attendance. Other laws have been passed in order to protect children from abuse. Most states have a whole set of laws that describe what happens when an abused child is removed from his or her home. There are also laws about adoption, foster care, and special health and education programs for children. Here's what you need to do to make sure you finish everything you need to do today. Number 1, take the quiz. You know the deal with the quizzes. 3 questions, 6 points total, 1 point just for answering a question, 2 points for getting it right, 0 points for not getting it done on time. Open book, open note, and open internet. Find your answers where you can get them. Go back and listen to the video to find answers or check out the reading on your own. And then you want to complete the review activities. They are checked for completion. Answers are provided on the following slides, along with guidance and instruction to find correct answers. There is always feedback submitted for your review activities. Okay, let's take a look at what we have for our sources of law review activities. So this first one talks about 1 accident, 2 trials. Follow the diagram through the questions below. For both, we start in the same place. Tracy was driving under the influence when she hit Steve's car at an intersection after running a stop sign. Steve was hurt in the accident. Tracy failed the breathalyzer test at the scene of the crash. If this were to be handled in criminal law, the police arrest Tracy for driving drunk. She decides to, the state decides to prosecute. It charges her with violating the state's drunk driving law. In the criminal trial, the jury finds Tracy guilty of violating the drunk driving law. As a result of the jury's verdict, the judge issues a sentence. The judge follows the sentencing guidelines found in state law. The judge revokes Tracy's driver's license for 2 years and sentences her to 30 days in prison. Or it can also go through civil court. Steve files a lawsuit against Tracy claiming that she drove carelessly. He asks for the money he spent on car repairs and medical bills in addition to the time he lost from work. In the civil trial, the jury finds that Tracy drove carelessly. The jury awards Steve enough money to cover his medical bills and car repairs. After the jury returns the verdict, the judge orders Tracy to pay Steve the amount that the jury decided and he should receive for his bills and repairs. In both cases, Tracy has to defend her actions in court. And did you know someone can be found innocent in a criminal case, but found at fault in a civil case and be ordered to pay for damages? So what do we have to do with this? Let's compare and contrast. Based on what you have learned, complete the Venn diagram and about this using the statements below. So let's start with A. The defendant may have to pay money. Well, let's remember what a defendant is. A defendant is the person accused of a crime or named in the civil lawsuit. So this would be a case where that is both. Both, yes. So the defendant would have to pay money. Well, either they could pay a fine that is determined by their criminal court case, or they could have to pay damages, or so like how Tracy had to pay Steve enough money to cover his medical bills and car repairs. The defendant may get jail time or a loss of privileges. So the big thing there is jail time. Jail time is the consequence of criminal law. And there are other losses of privileges like losing a driver's license. Really, in a civil case, what you are going to part with mostly is money. Let's look at some of our other ones. C deals with a crime that was committed. D, the case involves a problem between 2 individuals. E, the case involves the government against a person. F, trials can be heard and decided by a jury. G, the remedy is decided according to state guidelines. H, the remedy is decided according to what is asked for. So you just need to make sure that you are sorting those ones correctly. Then let's take a look at a case study. The candidate at the post office. In 2006, a Massachusetts man collected signatures and campaigned for political office on a sidewalk right outside the post office. The sidewalk was located on post office property. He was told that the activity was against Postal Service regulations, but he refused to stop and was arrested. The man fought the charges, saying that the regulation limited his right to free speech. The post office argued that the sidewalk was property of the Postal Service, not public property like other sidewalks. He had been asked to move to the public city sidewalk along the street, but he had refused. The case reached the First Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. The court sided with the post office, saying that the regulation did not violate the First Amendment. The post office sidewalks was unique from the city sidewalk, where the candidate could have gathered signatures without any problem. The court's decision was based on a number of earlier decisions about freedom of speech and also serves as a precedent for future cases. Making connections. Match the statement to the correct source of law. So let's do one of these together. Gives Congress the power to establish post offices. Well, that is a power that is found in the United States Constitution. You also have to look for laws about the Postal Service made by Congress, laws created by the Postal Service so it can run smoothly, decisions made by the courts about any of the laws regarding the Postal Service, and what are laws about what you can and cannot do on city sidewalks. So you have to match those with the correct definition. Then the last part, you have to think about how these things affect you. Check the source of law that you think most affects people in their everyday lives. Is that the Constitution, statutes or laws passed by Congress, regulations passed by federal agents, legal precedent, or local ordinances? So I just need to know why you selected this source of law and give at least 2 reasons based on what you have learned in this lesson.